In the strict and unforgiving society of the Middle Ages, the scales of justice were not held by human hands, but by the will of God. Divine retribution was not a matter of legal proceedings, but of sacred rituals that laid bare the secrets hidden from man. Among the most dreaded of these rituals was the ordeal, a test of faith and fortitude, where fire, water, and iron became the instruments of judgment. For pregnant women accused of moral failings, the ordeal was often the only option, a terrifying gamble with the fate of their child hanging in the balance. The belief was that God himself would protect the innocent and expose the guilty. During the ordeal, the accused might be asked to reach into a pot of boiling water to retrieve a stone or ring. After the ordeal, her hand would be wrapped in linen and inspected several days later. Healing wounds declared innocence, while any sign of infection pointed to guilt. Imagine the torment of being paraded through the streets, the weight of the community's gaze upon you, their whispers echoing your every move. You are not just fighting for yourself, but for the child within you, their innocent life hanging in the balance. You are led to a tribunal where a fire has been prepared. The flames leap and dance, casting flickering shadows that mimic the torment in your heart. One by one, the judges approach, their faces stern, their eyes searching for signs of weakness. When it is your turn, you must step into the circle of fire, your feet hot sand, and utter the words of the Lord's Prayer. Each word is a prayer, each breath a plea for divine protection. Your hand is then plunged into the boiling water. Time seems to stop. The searing pain shoots through your arm, and you cry out, the sound catching in your throat. But you cannot pull back. You must endure. You must prove your innocence. If you survive the initial ordeal, the real test begins. Days pass, and you await the verdict, the fate of your child hanging in the balance. Finally, the moment arrives when the judges return. They examine your hand, their faces impassive. The verdict hangs in the air, and then it is spoken. You are found guilty. Such trials were not uncommon during the Middle Ages. They were conducted to uphold the religious and moral order of the society. The ordeal served as a way to determine the truth, and it was believed to be ordained by God. However, these trials were not without their flaws. They subjected the accused to immense physical and psychological torment, and they left little room for mercy or compassion. As the ordeal continued to be practiced throughout Europe, variations of the test emerged. One such variation involved carrying a heated bar of iron across a set distance. This test not only required great strength and endurance, but also precision. The accused had to walk carefully to avoid dropping the iron, yet they also had to move quickly enough to avoid letting it cool. Each step was heavy, not just from the weight of the iron, but from the knowledge that every move was scrutinized. What makes the story even more horrifying is that pregnant women were not exempt from these trials. In fact, their condition made the ordeal more brutal and more public. The presence of new life growing within them became a tool to accuse them of wrongdoing, twisting the most sacred of bonds into a means of torment. While the ordeal might have seemed like a barbaric practice, it was deeply ingrained in the cultural and religious beliefs of the time. It was seen as a way to maintain order and morality, and it was believed to have divine sanction. For many people, the ordeal was a necessary evil, a painful but necessary step to uncover the truth. What if I told you there was a place where you could go and have your sins literally burned into your body? Welcome to medieval France. Now, when we think of punishments from that time period, we usually think of fire and water, the ordeal of fire where the accused person was burned at the stake, or the ordeal of water where they were drowned. But those were not the only ways that medieval society branded guilt onto the body. Because in some places, punishment was not hidden behind monastery walls or confined to the whisper of courts. It was made public. A woman accused of moral transgressions could be brought to the village square, where the weight of judgment was carried not only in words but in lasting marks. The idea was simple. If sin could be seen, then sin could be shamed. What we today call branding was then a form of punishment that fused body and law together. A mark was not just a scar. It was a statement, a decree that one's life was now bound to the memory of a single accusation. In France, records from Normandy and Brittany speak of this practice, rooted in customs that stretched back to Roman times. Their branding had long been used to signal moral failing or social inferiority. Medieval rulers simply extended the logic. If the body carried the evidence of sin, then the body should also carry the weight of punishment. Now, branding was less common in England, but public penance was widespread. A woman might be ordered to walk barefoot through the streets, wrapped in a white garment, her head bowed, her voice confessing, while men and women she knew stood by watching in silence. Sometimes a rope was tied around her neck, not as a threat, but as a symbol, an emblem of disgrace carried before the eyes of all. Such acts were not confined to a single region. The Holy Roman Empire recorded similar customs well into the 15th century, and church scholars gave them their blessing. They argued that punishment was not cruel, it was corrective. Public shame was a necessary reminder for all who watched. In this logic, suffering was not senseless, it was sacred, but behind the doctrine lay fear. Fear that moral disorder would spread, that if one woman defied the expectations of her community, others might follow. Fear that the stability of village, town, or kingdom could unravel if discipline was not carved deep and seen by all. And so women bore the marks of this fear upon their bodies and in their lives. The branding itself was less important than what it represented, the power of society to claim ownership over honor, over morality, over the very skin of those it judged. And once a mark was made, it could not be undone. The woman became a living reminder of the system that condemned her, walking proof of a world where law and shame were bound together. For more on how people in the past dealt with the problems of the present, stay tuned. If branding once left marks meant to last a lifetime, other forms of discipline in the medieval world sought to reach deeper than the body. They aimed at the soul. Among them was the ritual of public penance, a practice framed by the church as spiritual medicine, a way to cleanse sin through visible humility. Yet for women carrying pregnancies outside of wedlock, penance was rarely merciful. The records of medieval courts reveal how these rituals unfolded. A woman judged guilty might be ordered to walk barefoot through her town, dressed in plain garments meant to symbolize both purity lost and purity sought. She was instructed to lower her eyes, to confess aloud as she moved through the streets, while the community followed in silence or recited prayers. Every step reminded her that she no longer carried her life privately. She walked as a symbol of judgment. In some cases, this penance was accompanied by forms of correction meant to emphasize humility and obedience. Reformers like Peter Damian argued that hardship itself could be a kind of salvation, echoing the trials of Christ. To them, suffering was not cruelty but instruction, a way to transform sin into redemption. Yet for the women subjected to these rituals, the experience was far less noble. The body became a stage upon which moral lessons were performed for the crowd. The pregnancy itself was treated not as a fragile state of life, but as visible evidence of transgression. Each ritual walk declared her life not her own, but part of a performance of shame. In towns across England and beyond, ecclesiastical courts recorded countless such sentences. The white sheet became a symbol as recognizable as any crown or scepter. To see a woman wrapped in it was to see dishonor embodied, moving slowly across the cobblestones for all to witness. What was framed as penance often functioned as control. The church maintained its authority not only through sacred words, but through the public display of obedience. Women, especially those carrying children outside of wedlock, were made examples. Their silence, their endurance, their lowered heads were warnings to others. This is what awaits those who stray. The crowd, too, became part of the ritual. Their presence turned shame into theater. Neighbors who once shared bread or greeted with warmth now looked on as judges, their eyes reinforcing the sentence more strongly than any priest's voice. Penance was never private. It was spectacle, designed to echo long after the procession ended. In this way, penance blurred the line between faith and fear. It was said to bring the sinner closer to God, but it also reminded every bystander of the power the church held over their lives. Redemption might follow, but so too did memory. A woman could complete her penance, but she could never step again into the streets without recalling the days she walked them in shame. Have you ever wondered what it is like to be locked up for a crime you didn't commit? Imagine being thrown into a dark, dank cell with no one to hear your cries. You eat meager meals while the walls close in around you, and the only sound you hear is the echo of your own footsteps. You pace back and forth waiting for someone to come and rescue you, but no one does. In medieval Europe, this wasn't just a nightmare, it was a reality for many women. While some women were paraded through the streets in penance, others were hidden away. Behind the closed doors of monasteries and convents, silence became its own punishment. For those accused of breaking vows or carrying pregnancies outside marriage, confinement within monastic walls was a common sentence. Outwardly, it appeared merciful away from public shame, shielded from the eyes of neighbors. But in truth, this isolation was another form of control. The practice grew alongside the reforms of the 11th and 12th centuries, when the church sought to tighten discipline over both clergy and laity. To place a woman within a convent was to remove her from temptation, or so it was claimed. Yet the cells where she lived were not retreats of peace. They were austere, stripped of comfort, and marked by silence. Days stretched long with prayer, meager meals, and the heavy weight of solitude. For nuns who broke their vows, the punishment was especially severe. A pregnancy inside the convent was seen not only as personal failure, but as desecration of sacred vows. Some women were confined for life, their existence narrowed to a single small chamber where silence replaced freedom. For laywomen too, confinement was used to preserve the honor of families. Daughters from respected households who conceived outside wedlock could be sent into these hidden spaces until childbirth, their condition kept away from the eyes of society. In places like Flanders, northern France, and the German principalities, records describe this quiet exile. Families would petition local authorities or church leaders, asking that the woman be enclosed until the scandal passed. Her fate was decided not for her well-being but to protect the reputation of those around her. What happened within the walls was of little concern to the world beyond. To the church, this isolation was framed as mercy. Officials claimed it was protection from shame, an opportunity for reflection, even a chance for redemption. But the reality was harsher. Confinement silenced the accused, cutting her off from family, community, and the rhythms of daily life. Her voice faded, her presence vanished, and with time, even her story was forgotten. The conditions of these cells varied, but the pattern remained the same. Discipline through solitude. Daily prayers were required, often alongside fasts that weakened the body. The silence of the cloister became a constant companion, pressing in heavier than stone walls. For many, the greatest punishment was not hunger or ritual, but erasure, the slow disappearance of self beneath the weight of expectation. When childbirth came, the cycle often ended with separation. The infant might be given to a foundling home or raised in anonymity, severing ties that could have preserved hope. In this way, confinement within the convent was not only about punishing one life, but about controlling the beginning of another. It was a form of discipline that extended beyond a single body, shaping futures unseen. Thus, within the stillness of monastic halls, countless stories were buried, lives reduced to silence, choices replaced by obedience, and behind it all, the same unyielding lesson. The community's honor was valued above the individual's freedom. I'm making a series of videos about medieval punishments, and this one is about exile. But before I get to that, let me tell you about today's sponsor. For those who were not branded, paraded, or locked away, another fate often awaited: exile. Banishment was one of the harshest sentences a medieval community could deliver, not because it inflicted pain upon the body, but because it stripped a person of belonging. To be cast out meant losing protection, livelihood, and identity. For unmarried pregnant women, this punishment was both common and devastating. A single directive from the parish priest or the council of elders could decide it: leave and do not return. The words carried no trial, no formal defense, no appeal. The swelling of the body was enough evidence, enough reason for judgment. A pregnancy outside marriage was seen as undeniable proof of sin, and the community could not, or would not, allow such a visible disruption to remain in their midst. In smaller villages, especially, reputation was fragile. Every family's honor was bound to the behavior of its members, and the moral order of the community was guarded with vigilance. A woman who carried life outside wedlock was viewed as a threat to that order, a disruption that could spread dishonor if not removed, and so banishment became both a sentence and a warning. To be exiled was more than being told to leave a home. It was erasure. Friends, neighbors, even family often turned away, unwilling to challenge the decision or share in the shame. The woman became untouchable, as though her presence itself carried contagion. The child she bore was marked before birth, not by choice, but by the silence of those who watched her go. Court records from regions of England, such as Norfolk and Suffolk, describe these practices. Sometimes fines accompanied the sentence, but the exile itself was punishment enough. Without community, survival was uncertain. Without community, a woman was unseen, unprotected, and unnamed. Exile functioned as both justice and forgetting. Once a woman was gone, her story faded from the village memory. Her absence restored the appearance of order, as though the disruption had never occurred. The village remained intact, its reputation untainted, while the exiled bore the cost of maintaining that illusion. The cruelty of exile lay not in physical suffering, but in its permanence. A woman cast out rarely returned. Even if she survived, she was no longer bound to the world she once knew. She had been rewritten as an outsider, her life severed from the community that judged her, through ordeals of fire and water, through marks upon the skin, through penance in the streets. confinement in the cloister, and exile into the unknown. Medieval society revealed its priorities: order over compassion, discipline over mercy, honor over humanity. Pregnant women bore the sharpest edge of this balance. Their bodies turned into evidence, their lives shaped into lessons. And though centuries have passed, echoes of these practices still linger in debates about morality, autonomy, and justice. The past whispers that law is never neutral. It is always a mirror of fear, of control, of the fragile structures societies build to protect themselves. And often, the weight of that fear falls heaviest on those least able to resist.